Okay, so now I'm excited to introduce Thea Dunn to offer perspective on what farm to school could look like in the ECE setting. She's going to tell you a little bit more about herself. But Thea has been implementing farm to school practices for 6 years. Thea, I'm going to let you take it away. My son is yelling in the background.
Excellent. Hey, everybody. So Pisgah Collective is a year-round, fully outdoor preschool program. We're based in Brevard, North Carolina. And we serve families with children ages 18 months to 6 years old. And so our original location was actually on a local farm. And our first classroom was in a large hoop house, greenhouse. And so we were surrounded by farm to school opportunities just from the very beginning. And so it really started out very small. We started our first class garden so that we could have our own 100% kid friendly space to explore and experiment alongside our farmer friends. If you have been around 2 or 3 or 4 year olds, especially with a shovel, you know that they can have quite an impact on the space that they're in. And so we learned pretty quickly that we needed to sort of have our own space for that. And so we did find from the very beginning that starting the program that children are just so excited even at that young year and a half age, and inspired by growing things. And so when we moved to our current location in 2019, one of the first things we established on part of the property we were leasing was a class garden space. We built a few raised beds and it's just grown from there. We currently have 6 raised beds and then some other planting areas. And then we have a greenhouse that we built and it has an additional learning space, but also we're able to start our own plants in there. And then we also have a larger garden plot up the hill a little further from our class area that includes a pollinator garden and a market kind of garden. It's a more sunny area up there. So, Debbie, next slide, please.
Mhm.
I love that picture. So working with children under 6 and as young as a year and a half in a multi-age setting, especially, really requires varied goals and expectations in regards to garden education and group management and all sorts of things. But I would say that across the board, there's probably a top 3 favorites amongst all of our students as far as farm to school. Watering is definitely 100% number one, I think. They really love using the watering cans. One little tip, I used to always use a hose to fill it up, but now we have a big tub and they're able to do their own dipping. That's been a good hack instead of the children having to wait in line in that way for the little ones, especially. And it's something that we can do year round, even when the garden's winterized. We'll go into the garden sometimes and let them do some watering practice. And then planting, which is, quite a variety depending on the time of year, the group that's involved in the project. But planting is always a very fun aspect. And then harvesting tasting is the third, I'd say, favorite with this age group. We can go to the next slide. I would say, the kiddos take a lot of ownership, even these young ones within the garden and farm to school projects that they participate in. We constantly talk about what plants need to grow and what we can do to help them get what they need. And then in turn, that conversation, moves into what the plants actually give us, which is really neat. And there's just so much excitement that comes from it all the time. It's a very intentional space, our class garden. And so the children will see other children in the garden and wait patiently for their turn. And the anticipation is always just very exciting. A little side note from this photo here, potatoes are just such a hit every year. I mean, if you're able to do that with children ever, and if you're ever able to use purple potatoes, that is always very exciting because a lot of times children haven't experienced that. And so it's extra magical when a purple potato gets pulled out of the dirt. All right, next slide. Um, okay, so assessing impact. It's really interesting to see how children relate to their food, especially in the ECE setting. And we have a pretty broad demographic, I would say, in our student base. And so when they grow their food, they really want to eat it almost all of the time, even if, or at least to try it, which, is a win. I would say, piggybacking on Heather, the various like greens and lettuces are definitely something that parents get really surprised and excited about. Mint is something that I really like having in the garden with these kiddos because it's available about 8 months out of the year here. And so even if other things aren't really ready to be harvested, mint's always an option of, yes, you could go get a sprig of mint and that satiates them usually. Onions are a similar thing. we always have a pretty big herb garden. So lavender and rosemary are a similar option for things that are kind of around you around here. All right, we can go to the next slide. Yes. All right. Words of wisdom. Letting them get dirty is a very important, and getting dirty along with them. I think, especially at the beginning of the growing season, we do a lot of sort of like loose part garden activities with them, where we have a big bucket or even just a pile of dirt, and they have pots available. And they're just practicing filling up pots. And some of the littles are just dumping out dirt, and then some of the bigger children might be really excited about, then they're ready for a seed. And so then maybe there's some seeds that are available. And it's not necessarily with the intention of, actually successfully planting anything, but they're getting to do all of the aspects when then those projects happen. And I think the practice of letting them get dirty for certain children, having them practice that ahead of time can alleviate some sensory things in the moment of that being frustrating. Instead of them having to leave the garden, they're ready to brush the dirt off their hands. And then, limiting expectations in general. I think going into a lesson or a block of time in the garden, and really following the child to see where their interests are. Some of the most substantial lessons that I have had in the garden with the kiddos have been when I've been stepped back and kind of observing the children and they're doing the same thing. And that's when they spot the praying mantis on the vent, or all of the variety of things that happen intrinsically when they're given that space to do that. Um, and then, so relating farm to table experiences to other aspects of life and learning, we really love how those conversations can happen. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. My notes just cut off. I had a little note here, and now oh no, I think my time's maybe running out. Um, but there's a lot of conversations about life cycles and about the things that we like might be different than what our friends like. That's a really great example of a conversation that comes up in the garden. And so I think that that's an important aspect. And then, yes, experiment, dare to fail. There's so much that comes up in that. There's little tricks that I'll do when the children get to plant their peas at the beginning of the season. Usually, I'll plant my own flat of seeds that then I can kind of replace the ones that maybe didn't quite make it. But other than that, we talk a lot about how that's just a part of life. And so I think mostly if you're having fun, then the children are having fun, and yay, farm to school. And I do
Mhm.
just want to say one more thing, a thank you to Growing Minds and ASAP, because the resources really have been amazing for our program as well. We've launched into cooking projects, and we do pickles every year because of the mini grant that we initially got from you guys. And it's prompted all sorts of amazing projects with the kids. And I hope to continue that. So thank you.
Thank you, Thea. That was beautiful. It's so beautiful to hear how you're able to kind of foster that curiosity and ownership for your and self-discovery for your students in the garden. So thank you for sharing that perspective.